Okay. Good afternoon. I really love the space and presenting to all of you. It's the second time I'm here, and I love just how at home I feel at this conference. We're gonna present to you some data that we collected. I'm saying collected because it's not really research. I'll give you a bit of the context. We had an event. So we're social workers. We work at the McGill School of Social Work, and we had an event during Black History Month about maybe 2 years ago, where we were collaborating with community to, better inform our profession. And so we invited community members, some of them are in this space today, to join us for a discussion on Afrofuturism and healing. And I will say that this whole idea of Afrofuturism isn't something that is necessarily talked about in our social work classrooms, especially even I think beyond social work classrooms, just in the social sciences and health. Right. So what is Afrofuturism? And so it was new to me at the time, and just kind of, I think maybe having this discussion allowed us to talk and think about its utility, perhaps for mental health practitioners. And so when we speak to Afrofuturism, it asks us to think about what the future could look like, a future where Black people exist. And to exist, again, is very political. It's not something that's negligible. But not only to exist, but to consider what it might be like if we were to flourish and thrive in this future. And, freedom, if we were free, it's different than emancipation, right? It's kind of considering what it means to be free if there never was colonialism, capitalism, neoliberalism. So what could that look like for Black people? And so we only have 15 minutes to maybe, oh no, this is giving me the, okay. So we only have like 15 minutes to kind of sum up a really rich discussion that we had and the messages that were shared during this discussion. And we wanted to kind of inviting professionals and mental health clinicians from different disciplines. So we had people from that practice mindfulness, artists. We had people that work in the community that were organizers. And we asked them to think about, well, how do we get there, right? How do we envision mental health professionals intervening in a way that could bring us closer to this idea of freedom, and can speak to some of Afrofuturism. And I'm not going to go through everything, the founder, because we don't have that much time. But, one of the things I think that I can share with you is that so much of what we know is been brought to us by like history with a capital H, right? So history that's been defined by others, that doesn't center us, that doesn't center our experiences. And what Afrofuturism kind of speaks to is this idea that we can go back to the past and access narratives and stories from those who perhaps weren't the storytellers, right? The creators, right? And it was funny that, of course, I'm going to get sidetracked, but I was thinking about the talk that we did with Harambe, not that we did, but this idea of nursemaids, right? And the stories that we are now seeing through archiving, right? That we weren't able to access. So archiving as a tool to kind of go back to access those stories of those who weren't given voices at the time, but then to tell their stories today. And so Afrofuturism does allow us to do some of that.
All right. So quickly, Hello. Yes, quickly. So if anyone's watched, things like the Jetsons and stuff like that when you were a young person, we realized that the colonial project never actually intended for us to kind of make it into any type of future. For Black people to be part of the future, necessarily as subjects, probably as objects somewhere in there, but we were never part of these stories, and that's where part of the Afrofuturism and the link to Black joy is also this idea of how do we then work towards something that's going to be constructive for the future when we don't see ourselves in the future. And so we get stuck in repeating kind of the past and being stuck in this present of the struggle of getting what needs to be done right now today, because we don't know what's happening tomorrow. I don't know. We don't know, legacy. What does that look like? What is it supposed to be when we don't see this possibility for later on? And so when we are able to create stories and develop things like science fiction with Black characters, there is this space now that's able to be opened of, okay, and we're going to have some beautiful quotes later, but this whole idea of, the impact from 7 generations before to the impact of 7 generations after, being able to see that if we do have a life outside of struggle, then there's a future for us later. There's also, okay, what am I doing now that's also contributing to what's going to happen later? And now we're able to talk about healing and about breaking intergenerational traumas because we are seeing that there will be next generations that will benefit, and that could benefit from the work that we do now and from not doing some work now that would allow us to embrace life and joy and be joyful in life and share kind of a burden. And it's also this idea that's so important when we're talking about Black lives and why they matter and why we want to justify why they matter. We've been so stuck on being validated and recognized as living experiences that are very harsh, that are very hard, that are very dehumanizing, that we use images. We've been using a lot of images that speak to that dehumanize Black bodies, the media, the way we present and look at that. I am suffering, I am struggling, but that also impacts identity and identity development. So when we're focused on things like Afrofuturism, Black joy, it's also the idea that yes, there's struggle, but Black stories started way before, someone decided, way before slavery. Our ancestors have been doing some good things before we showed up, and there are things that could be used and repeated and learned from and not repeated, but that we could also show that, being Black is not something that's just deficit focused and very, when we're talking about recovery, what does that look like as well when from a Black space? So Afrofuturism kind of speaks to that. Yeah, I think you might just.
So what we tried to do then was to ask our presenters what the helping profession could look like, through inspiring Afrofuturism. If we could, what would we want? How would it look like? And what's wrong with our current kind of system and the way we set things up? So these were kind of the questions that we asked during this panel discussion. And maybe I'll just go to some of the themes, right? So just to kind of summarize, and I don't know if we'll have enough time to go through every single one of them, but these were the things that our panelists kind of spoke to in terms of, well, this is what healing would look like, so connections. Maybe the first one.
Well, I kind of spoke to that in terms of, returning to the past to look to the future. And this panel was really great. Like I can't do it justice by kind of, summarizing what was said. So if you're able to read the quotes, they're really the body of the work in terms of understanding, what themes came out and how they're all related to really how we move forward into a space of positivity, a space of collective healing, which was the second theme. and how the collective, really quickly, like this quote right here, how, individuality is like the disease of the Western world. It's not something that gets anybody anywhere, even people who are Euro descendants. And it's, if we're going to be able to move forward, if I'm carrying the load by myself, there's only so much for, so many step forwards that I could take. But if we're 5 or if we're 6 and if we're 10 and we're sharing that 100, not only can I move forward, we could all move forward, together and at different paces, but we can move forward. So it increases the capacity for that. Yes, and this was also something that we talked a lot about today. How being Black and being yourself, the idea of who decides what professional hair looks like, who decides, being able to be angry, be upset, have emotions without someone telling you that your emotions are not valid, without someone fitting you in type of a stereotype, being able to show up as your Black self, whatever that means for you, we define our Blackness individually, and I have other people also define us in terms of what our Blackness is. So being able to show up as authentic people everywhere that we navigate. Yes. So that top there, healing is experiencing and meeting yourself, not the self you've created. Healing is meeting you. I think this is like fire.
What also came up was this idea of coping, right? And so how there is kind of this idea that we are being not put in positions to heal, but rather to cope. And that in some ways, when we think about how mental health professionals are there to get us to cope, they're not actually treating the root symptom, right? So, this kind of negative connotation that comes with this idea of coping to survive rather than to thrive and to flourish. And some really beautiful quotes here as well. And then there was also kind of like this idea of colonial racial capitalism, right? And how that limits our ability to be free, that limits our ability to how we show up and our ability to heal. And this idea of rest, right? This inability to rest, and that's being a luxury in a capitalist kind of society. And so we also heard about how bureaucracy, so the fact that in our institutions as social workers and other health professionals, how we're forced to work in these spaces that are literally kind of, anti-human, right? So this notion of bureaucracy being anti-human, and how a lot of us in these helping professions don't actually enter these professional helping professions to do the red tape work, right? So you've got community workers that are saying that, you know what, if I could, avoid the red tape, then I would. That's why I'm not a social worker. But, I kind of am a social worker, because through community, I'm allowed to or able to do much more than through the institutions. And this idea of dreaming, right? So again, tying again to this Afrofuturism, this idea of dreaming about how how we can be free, how it's possible for us to be free. And so can social work be healing? I think one of the things we need to realize is that, in order for us to think about how social work or the work that we do in these institutions, we have to also understand how these institutions, how we can dream or think of our profession in ways that, don't exist, right? So how can we project or imagine doing this work without the constraints of colonialism, capitalism. And I think that's really hard to do. So can social work be healing in its current state? No. But if we can think about what it looks like or what our work could look like outside of capitalism, colonialism, then perhaps we can kind of get there. And so maybe I'll just let you wrap up in the 41 seconds that we have left in terms of what we can kind of start doing.
Well, definitely the move away from treating symptoms and coping for survival. I think that's one of the big ones in what we've been talking about today, finding meaningful ways to promote Black authenticity and recognizing the harm that is done within the practice and how we reproduce certain of these things as social workers through, again, the dehumanizing of Black people when we're become agents of social control instead of agents of liberation and supports of liberation. So I think that would be the two. And of course, the recognizing Black people's existence as the past and the future. This idea of what not reinventer la roue non plus, but what's been done before. And how can that be used to move forward? So on that note, thank you.